Well, welcome back to Kettle Additions. This is Austin McIlroy. I'm the master brewer of Cabin Boys Brewery, and today my subject is all going to be about Belgian beers, why I love them so much, and how they got into my life and what they are. So, a little bit about how my decision was, how Cabin Boys was going to become a Belgian heavy brewery. So that's kind of what we know ourselves as. And in opening up Cabin Boys, it was mostly European style beers. So, but Belgian beers is definitely the heart of what we love to brew most. And if you would ask most of our brewers when they would say what their favorite beer to brew would probably be Bearded Theologian, which is our Belgian quad. And the reason for that is just a really cool style, not only to drink, but to brew. And when I mean to brew it, I mean from the very get-go, when you mash in a Belgian quad, your brewery smells immaculate. So, but that's not why we fell in love with it. My love affair with Belgian beers started in 2010 when I go to Belgium for, I would call it the first time, with a couple of buddies of mine, and we ran into a brewery called Brugesat. And that was my first taste of Belgian blondes. And it was incredible. It was an eye-opening experience because normal, or let's say Pilsners, or the normal beer that we were drinking at the time, were definitely one flavor, but very clean and consistent European-style lagers. And when we went to Belgium and found out that beer has an immense amount of flavors going into it that are coming from the yeast strain, the malts, the hops that they select, and sometimes spices, it was a definite eye-opening moment when beer just doesn't have this one genre of flavor. And that kind of opened up the book to all the flavors of what beer can be. So it was my gateway into more flavor into the Belgian world, which was super cool. So Brugesat is a beer that I hold really close to my heart because that showed me, wow, okay, beer doesn't have to be just placed into this one category of one flavor. It can have explosive amounts of aromas and mouthfeels and colors and all sorts like that. So right now I am drinking our Hollows Triple style beer from Cabin Boys right now. And I thought it was appropriate because this is our winter seasonal, and it's out in distribution right now. But the recipe development of this beer is such a really fun story that not a lot of people know about. But I actually wrote this recipe while I was in the Netherlands. So, and you ask, well, how did the Netherlands come into play? Well, I was at a brewery called La Trappe. While I was in school, we were taking a trip around Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium, a little bit of Czech Republic, and France. And we found ourselves at this brewery called La Trappe in the Netherlands. And we were on a 3-hour tour with the master brewer of this wonderful monastery and wonderful brewery, Trappist style brewery. And it was just amazing to see the consistency and control that that brewery had on such an explosive, flavorful beer. So they're taking all of these flavor compounds from the yeast and being able to replicate that flavor every single time that they put it into the kettles and into their fermentation tanks. So it was really cool. I got to sit down with him, and my first question was, what is the most important thing in developing a Belgian line within a brewery. And he was, he said to me was, you got to get two things right. You got to find a yeast strain that is right for your brewery and the right thing for your own palates. And he was like, now for us, we've had our yeast strain for over 250 years. And obviously, we're not going to be able to, go 250 years back and get a yeast strain that tastes like that specifically for us. So what I did was look at a portfolio of yeast strains that are coming from lineages of yeast strains just like that. So it might be a combination of two or four, but they're coming from breweries that have had this Belgian yeast strain for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And being able to use that and become the benefactors of using that yeast strain. So we get our Belgian yeast strain that we use in-house at the brewery for most of our Belgian beers. Now, we might break away every once in a while just to test out a certain yeast strain that comes out, or one that we're really curious about and have heard about. But for the most part, all of the Belgian beers that we make at the brewery come from my school in Germany. And you're like, wait, Germany, you're buying your Belgian yeast strain from Germany. Well, it's a yeast bank at Duman's Academy, and they hold most of the yeast on the European continent. And they grow and take care of the yeast strains that the Europeans have cultivated for, thousands of years. So they had about 5 or 6 different yeasts that would have fallen into the category that we wanted to use for our Belgian beers. And we landed on one that really complemented the malts that we were using and the water that we have here in Tulsa. And it provides a very good foundation for what a Belgian beer should taste like, the mouthfeel and everything else. So when selecting a yeast strain, there's in ale yeast strains, you've got 90 different esters that are going to be produced by the yeast. So these esters come from a morphology of it being able to attract itself to pollinators in nature. So yeast comes from nature first, and the reason that it has all of these esters is because originally it is attracting it's attracting pollinators to itself so it can travel and propagate itself in many different places. So that's why we have esters in yeast. And throughout time, humans have been able to select the certain types of esters and profiles from these yeast strains that we have found in nature that fit our palates. So, which is a really, really cool relationship because yeast is this wonderful fungi that has a mind of its own that we get to learn and then in turn try to control to make something that we enjoy to drink. So our Belgian yeast comes from this lineage of hundreds of years and is propagated in Germany and then sent over to us. And we use it and we get a few different beers out of that yeast strain that we just love, one of them being the Hollows. So the conversation that I'm having with the master brewer of La Trappe is that's the first thing out of his mouth is this relationship between how you should treat and think about yeast and what you want from it. And then the second thing is knowing your malt and knowing your providers to get this perfect amount of balance between your hop and water relationship within the glass. So we here in America, at first, I was writing my recipes with German malts that are used across the European continent. and they were wonderful. They were produced and malted by a family called Weiermann in Bamberg, Germany. And thankfully, I've been able to meet them a few different times. I have a red pair of overalls from them because of a certain couple of different events. And it's just really fun to have that relationship with them and be able to use their extremely high quality malt. So, unfortunately, now I can't get or can't use their malt. I could, but it wouldn't be fiscally responsible on my part to use their malt in the way that we did back in the day, because prices have gone up so much after COVID, and then they exploded with the Russian-Ukrainian war, and that's a relationship in between raw material um, and breweries that a lot of people don't think about. Is, we're a small brewery in Tulsa, but our scope of thought is extremely global because we can be affected by a drought in Canada. We could be affected by huge amounts of water being dumped on Europe in a season, or it could be a really, really cold winter in the Willamette Valley here in America. There's a number of things and a number of reasons, and economy being one of them, has led us to look domestically towards our malt. And Cody and I last week kind of talked about that relationship just for a little bit, and so we found a malt that from a provider here in Idaho, in the Snake River Valley, and it's really neat to have been able to get connected to them by a friend. And that Snake River Valley is kind of protected from a couple of different extraneous weather conditions, such as drought or anything like that, because the Snake River always flows and they pull water from that to grow their malt on a consistent basis. So I knew that by selecting that malt from that malt house, which is called Great Western, that I was going to have what seems, and I could be wrong, 5 years from now, but seemingly at this time, I will have a consistent product for the foreseeable future. And that malt is grown on the exact same altitude as in Germany. It's malted at the same temperature. They aren't necessarily trying to replicate what the Germans are doing with their malts. It's just what they have found creates a really good fermentability of the starches in the malt, and protein, head retention, and mouthfeel. So a wonderful relationship. That is the backbone of where our Belgian beers are born. So the malt is the backbone, and without the right ratios of usage of these raw materials, you're going to get a very out of whack beer that is not going to be enjoyable. No matter how good your yeast is, and no matter how good your water is, without the right ratios of fermentability, the consistency of the malt material, if you use one malt tomorrow and then the next day, or a different one the next day, it's always going to breed a different beer. So that being a wonderful relationship, and relationship within our glass is just one reason, or a couple of reasons, why our Belgian beers have become such a popular part of our portfolio in the brewery. So when the master brewer of La Trappe was talking to me, and forgive me, I keep calling him the master brewer because I literally don't remember his name. That was more than a decade ago, so forgive me. But one thing that he taught me was, when you're writing a recipe for a Belgian beer, a lot of people try to create the aromas and flavor profile through too many different ingredients. So, what he really strained to me is the simpler the recipe is, the more you lean on your good ingredients that you have acquired and found, the better and cleaner your Belgian beers are going to taste. And what I mean cleaner is your ester profile is going to be exactly what you want it to be. So, the Hollows Triple being one of the more flavorful and more robust, albeit though it is a lighter color beer. It's standing at 9%. It is one of our most flavorful beers in our portfolio, and it only has 2 malts in it: water, hops, and yeast. So it's one of my least complicated recipes, and I took that to heart from his advice. And lo and behold, he was obviously correct, because he's been brewing probably longer than I have been alive. And what a really cool, experience that was, to be able to jump ahead of the curve and not have to go through learning that through trial and error, and just being able to sit down with someone who has made more beer in his lifetime than I probably ever will, and gain that knowledge. So that's I wanted to sit here and tell you guys, if you're going to make a beer, make your recipe as simple as possible and let those wonderful ingredients that you have selected sing. So the Belgian Triple. So there's 4 different styles of Trappist style beers. So Trappist beer literally means historically that monks had been in the process of making it. So you can have a brewery that has a master brewer and a brewing team and a packaging team, but if it calls itself a Trappist brewery, the monks have to have some hand in the process of making the beer. So if you see an actual stamped Trappist style beer, know that monks actually still get involved, maybe not within the nitty-gritty brewing process, but they are approving it. They're going through quality control. They may be ordering or having relationships with raw material. So they are very much involved within the brewing industry if it's called a Trappist brewery. So that's what that means when you see Trappist style beers. Now, we can't call our beers Trappist style. That's why on our cans it says triple style ale or quad style ale, and we don't put Trappist on any part of what we're saying on our beer, because we're not a Trappist brewery. So even though our number one selling beer, Bearded Theologian, has that kind of fun relationship within the name of Trappist beer. So there's 4 styles. There's singles, there's doubles, there's triples, and quads. So one of the number one questions that I get in the brewery is, what makes a quad, or what makes a triple, a double, a single? Well, those are literal styles that have been morphed into the Trappist style beers. So a single is the first one. It's the lowest ABV and the lightest in color, and probably has more hop aromas and character within it. It probably has a little bit more bitterness to it. And that was the first beer on earth that I know of that was nicknamed a gardening beer or a lawnmower beer. The monks actually coined that phrase for themselves when they made this style for the first time a couple hundred, maybe 250 years ago, let's say. And then a double or a double jumps up in ABV just a little bit to, let's call it 6 to 7.5%. I could be off here and there, but that's the general consensus. And it goes to a darker color. So this would be the little cousin of a quad. So, but even though that it's dark and lower in ABV, the doubles are full of flavor. So this is the style in the Trappist beers that gets more adjuncts added to it than any of the other four. So, and when I mean adjuncts, anything that is outside of the four main ingredients of beer is called an adjunct. So the four main ingredients of beer is water, hops, yeast, malt. Anything outside of that is an adjunct. Sugar, adjunct. Corn, adjunct. Oats, adjunct. You get the picture. So one of the cool things about doubles, though, or doubles, is sometimes star anise or cinnamon is added into those, which makes that style playful and gains a little bit of notoriety of, let's call it, popularity within the drinkers, because sometimes they're a little bit more different than the more traditional Trappist styles. So then you get into the triple, which is a style that lives in the 7.5 to 9% realm. Ours sits at the very top at 9%. And it is going to be lighter in color and maybe sometimes a little bit hoppier, definitely yeast forward and malt forward. It shouldn't have any alcohol burn to it, though when you get into the 9% realm, you're going to have alcohol warmth. That doesn't mean that you're going to actually taste alcohol. If the brewer has done it right, the beer is going to be smooth and very balanced. Then you have your final Belgian quad style, which is a dark style. So if you've noticed, they leapfrog themselves in color. So you go from light, dark, and when I mean dark, it's kind of like amber color. And then you go light again with the triple, and then the quad is going to be very dark amber, almost brown sometimes, but more on the red hue. And all of these beers should be very clear. There shouldn't be any haze involved with these styles. And then a quad, so the quad ABV range is 8 to 12%, so it has the largest breadth of alcohol content. And we purposefully at Cabin Boys have made our triple just a little bit more alcoholic than our quad, and that is actually two style. Our quad at the brewery is 8.4%, so it's on the lower range of a quad, and that was very purposeful because I wanted, at the time when I wrote that recipe, most of the breweries over in America, and nothing wrong with this, they were just making them all on the top end, 12, even sometimes blowing through the ceiling and making them 14, 15%. And there was too much alcohol involved, alcohol burn or alcohol flavor involved with those beers that I was drinking. And I thought to myself, I had wonderful quads in Europe that were exemplifying the really cool intricacies of malt aromas and yeast esters and sugar profiles that they were adding into the beer. And that's what I wanted to represent in ours. And that's the reason why ours is maybe a little bit drier than most quads out there. We let it ferment out a little bit further than most quads, and this allows that beer to have more malt character come through it and have the yeast really unstressed and push out as much esters as possible. And you get that in the glass, and lo and behold, you get all of this wonderful flavor, and then it finishes really easy. If you have too much alcohol and you haven't masked it right in the aromas and in the liquid, it's going to drag or leave an unwanted aftertaste. So in our quad, that doesn't happen because of the selection of malt and the ABV amounts. So that is the story of our brewery becoming and falling in love with Belgian styles and what those styles are and how the morphology of the yeast strain and how that ester profile came into the Belgian world and really is the definer of what Trappist style beers are. So, like, subscribe, follow us. That's the only way that this podcast keeps going. Although I have a love and enjoy this so much. Follow us. I will be talking with a guest next week, and we'll have another fun subject and topic to be put in your ears. So thank you guys, and I'll see you next week.